The Brushstroke of Madness. It started with the sound of scraping metal against canvas. Stan jolted awake, his breath catching as his eyes darted across the dimly lit studio. Paintbrushes lay scattered across the floor, palettes overturned, streaks of crimson paint splattered across a half-finished portrait that seemed to stare back at him. He pressed a trembling hand to his temple. "Just a dream," he whispered, trying to steady his heartbeat. But the faint hum in the air, the sound of distant whispers, almost rhythmic, made him question that. He turned toward the large mural on the wall, the one he'd been obsessing over for months. It was supposed to be his masterpiece, the one that would finally define him as more than just another artist. But now, it looked wrong. The shadows and the paint seemed to move when he blinked. Then came a voice from the dark corner of the studio. "You're up early," said Marshall, his business partner, stepping into the faint glow of the desk lamp. His expression was calm, too calm. "I had that dream again," Stan muttered. "The sale, the destruction. You were there, slashing through canvases with a chainsaw, laughing like it was some kind of carnival." Marshall chuckled. "Dreams are just reflections of the chaos in our heads, Stan. You've been working too hard." But Stan shook his head. "No, it felt real this time. You said something? Something about no course or tool being safe." Marshall walked closer, his shoes echoing softly on the concrete floor. "Maybe it's your guilt talking," he said, brushing a streak of dried paint from Stan's shoulder. "You've been painting for the wrong reason lately. You're not creating anymore, you're consuming." Stan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Marshall's smile flickered. "It means something's watching you. Every stroke, every layer. It's not just art anymore." Before Stan could respond, the lights flickered, and the entire studio was plunged into darkness. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, out of nowhere, a dim red glow spread across the mural. The painted figure's eyes gleamed like rubies under candlelight. Stan stumbled backward, his breath sharp. The figure in the painting had changed. The once serene portrait of a woman now wore a menacing grin, her eyes following him across the room. Marshall tilted his head, watching. "You see it too, don't you?" Stan could barely find his voice. "What did you do to my painting?" Marshall took a step closer, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "You opened it." The air turned cold. The paint began to drip from the mural, slowly, deliberately, as if the colors themselves were alive. And from within the painting, a low hum began to rise, a haunting melody that sounded eerily familiar. Stan realized it wasn't a dream. The sale wasn't just for art, it was for souls. The gallery beneath the floor. Stan didn't remember falling asleep. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in his studio. The room around him was vast and cold, its walls lined with paintings that glowed faintly in the dark, like each canvas was breathing. He stood up slowly, every step echoing in the emptiness. The floor beneath him wasn't wood or concrete anymore. It was glass. And beneath that glass, he could see more paintings. Endless rows of them, stacked and pulsing with faint light. "Marshall?" His voice trembled. "Where are we?" A familiar chuckle came from somewhere behind him. "Welcome to the gallery, Stan," Marshall said, his voice both distant and close at the same time. "You've been here before. You just don't remember." Stan spun around, but Marshall wasn't there. Only his reflection stared back from the glass, distorted and stretched. The reflection smiled before he did. "This isn't real," Stan whispered. "It's another dream." "Maybe," the voice said. "But tell me, when did you last wake up?" He turned in circles, panic rising. Every painting around him seemed to whisper his name. They weren't landscapes or portraits anymore, they were scenes from his past. His art teacher's old classroom. His childhood bedroom. The empty street where his car accident happened years ago. All of it painted perfectly, down to the smallest shadow. One painting caught his attention. It was new, wet paint glistening under invisible light. It showed him standing exactly where he was now, looking terrified. But in the painting, something else was behind him. Something tall, shrouded in canvas, holding a brush that dripped black ink. Stan turned sharply, but nothing was there. Then he saw Marshall again, standing across the room, holding a chainsaw covered in dried pigment. His suit was spotless, his smile too wide. "Why are you doing this?" Stan shouted. Marshall walked closer, dragging the chainsaw against the floor, sparks flickering. "You wanted to sell your art, didn't you?" he said softly. "To make people feel something real? You wanted your paintings to be alive. You made a deal, Stan. You just never read the fine print." Stan backed away, his reflection beneath the glass moving slower than him. The figure under his feet raised its head and opened its eyes, his own face staring back with hollow sockets. "What deal?" Stan whispered. Marshall stopped just a few feet away. "The Black Friday sale wasn't a promotion," he said. "It was an opening. Every artist who signed on gave a piece of themselves, their fear, their hunger, their guilt. You just gave more than anyone else." Stan looked around, his mind spinning. The paintings began to distort, the faces inside them pressing against the canvas like trapped souls. Their mouths opened in silent screams. "Marshall, make it stop!" "I can't," Marshall said calmly. "You're part of it now." The chainsaw roared to life, its teeth grinding with metallic fury. The light above them flickered violently. Paint dripped from the walls like blood, and the floor beneath Stan began to crack, the glass splintering into shards. He ran, but the gallery seemed endless. Each step took him deeper, not farther. The air smelled like oil and rust and something old, something dead. Then, from far above, he heard a faint sound, his alarm clock. Faint, muffled. Like it was buried beneath layers of paint. He screamed, pounding on the invisible ceiling. "Wake up! Wake up!" The glass shattered beneath him. And as he fell into the darkness below, Marshall's voice echoed after him, calm, deliberate, almost amused. "Don't sleep on these deals, Stan. They never end." The final canvas. The fall seemed endless. Colors and shadows twisted together like spilled paint swirling down a drain. Stan's body hit something solid, but not with pain. It was soft, pliable, like landing on stretched fabric. When he looked down, he realized the ground wasn't a floor. It was canvas. Endless, white canvas stretching in every direction. He stood up slowly. His shoes left red footprints behind him, though he wasn't bleeding. The air smelled like turpentine and decay. Above him, faint light seeped through cracks in the ceiling, the same glass floor he'd fallen through. Shapes moved up there. Some were human. Some weren't. Then a voice drifted through the shadows. "Do you understand now?" Stan turned. Marshall stood a few meters away, no longer the neat businessman from before. His face was pale and cracked like dried paint. One of his eyes shimmered like liquid mercury. The chainsaw was gone, replaced by a long, silver paintbrush that seemed to hum with every movement. "What is this place?" Stan demanded. Marshall tilted his head, smiling faintly. "You wanted immortality in art. Every artist does. You said you'd give anything to have your work remembered forever. This is where forever lives." He gestured around. The blank canvas beneath Stan's feet began to ripple. Slowly, faces emerged from the surface, hundreds of them, distorted and colorless, eyes wide and mouths open in frozen screams. Their features blended into one another, like melted portraits. Some of them he recognized, artists he'd admired, teachers he'd known, even strangers he'd seen online. "They all made the same deal," Marshall said softly. "Create something that lasts, and become part of it." Stan shook his head. "You tricked me." "No, Stan. You asked for this." Marshall dipped his brush into a jar of black ink that seemed to materialize from the air. "When you signed your contract, you didn't sell your art. You sold yourself." He began to paint across the air, strokes that hung glowing in the dark like smoke trails. Each one formed symbols, looping patterns that pulsed in rhythm with Stan's heartbeat. The air tightened, heavy. The faces beneath the canvas began to whisper again, words Stan couldn't make out but could feel in his bones. The walls rippled with faint color. A shape began to form behind Marshall, large and shapeless at first, then more defined, a massive figure made entirely of paint and shadow. Its arms were brushes. Its skin dripped like oil. Stan stumbled backward. No, no, I won't be part of this! Marshall laughed softly. You already are. The figure reached out, brushing its enormous hand against Stan's chest. His breath caught as his skin began to flake into pigment. Red, blue, and ochre dust lifted off him like smoke, swirling upward and blending into the air. He screamed, trying to run, but his legs grew heavy, his body hardening, flattening. His vision blurred as the world folded into 2 dimensions. He could see Marshall standing before him, watching with something almost like pity. Every masterpiece needs its creator, Marshall murmured. But every creation must pay the price. Stan tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper of air. His hands, now painted, reached forward in vain. The last thing he saw before his eyes froze over was Marshall stepping back, admiring his work. A new portrait hung on the canvas, Stan, immortalized in mid-scream, the background a swirl of blue and crimson light. His eyes still moved faintly, trapped within the paint. Marshall smiled, dipping his brush again. On sale until December 4th, he said quietly. After that, no refunds. He turned, walking away as the gallery lights dimmed. The whispers faded, one by one, until only silence remained, and the faint, eternal hum of the masterpiece that would never die.